Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 647. Today we're going to take a look at a book. This is Rangers of Shadowdeep, designed by Joseph McCullough, who also designed Frostgrave, which if you've watched the channel at all, you know I'm a big fan of that game. And what this game is it uses a very similar system to Frostgrave, except it's purely solo or cooperative. Now we've seen a couple of cooperative miniature games kind of have like cooperative modes, like the Walking Dead game from Mantic, the new Fallout game from Modiphius. Those are strictly head-to-head competitive games, skirmish games, but they also have a co-op mode. Now this one is built from the ground up to be soloable or cooperative. And what this is really a story-driven narrative that you're going to play through in sequence. There's a bunch of scenarios in the book. And then there's also like a bonus supplement, like a little mini expansion in the back of this book. Now I have here the hardcover. You can also get it in PDF and print it out yourself, or look at it on your iPad or your iPhone or whatever. Or you can get the softcover book. I got this from Drive Thru RPG. No relation to Drive Thru Review or Drive Thru Games, just a coincidence. But you can get it from sites like that, like Drive Thru RPG, and they can print it out and give you a physical copy, or you can just get the PDF and play from there. Usually if you do buy the physical copy, which I did, it'll also give you the PDF as well. So you can peruse it while you wait for your copy to arrive. So let's go ahead and jump into how the mechanics work. Like I said, if you're familiar with Frostgrave, you're going to pick this thing right up. But of course it has some twists and turns on it to make it cooperative. And I should say Frostgrave recently has some cooperative or solo scenarios built into that game as well. But again, this is built from the ground up to be soloable or cooperative. So let's take a look. So you've kind of caught me kind of middle of towards the end of the main campaign in the base book and just the base rules. And so what's going to happen is they're going to give you a scenario. Most scenarios are to set up on a 3 foot by 4 foot, or maybe 2.5 by 2.5 feet, or they'll give you like different rooms that are like a foot wide or so on. And then you set up the terrain that you've got. I would say the terrain is important depending on how important it is to you. I could see people actually playing this on like those dry erase maps and so on, and just using whatever figures they've got available. So I've got, these are supposed to be flies. Obviously these are crypt flares from the Flesh Eater Courts army that I have, but they look like giant fly people to me. And so the object of this scenario is to work our way down. There's some little modifications to the movement rules, and basically get down into this little staircase there that you can see, as well as do some other things in the scenario. So that's what's going to happen. It's going to give you that narrative bit to walk through, and then you move around and do combat and all that kind of stuff. There's an event phase, and that's going to vary from scenario to scenario. And then you're going to move on and play the next scenario, which I think is like a swamp or something here. But I have lots of pictures on my Instagram, and I'll put some links to my Instagram and Facebook and stuff, and pictures of all the scenarios I've played through up until now. And you'll see, a lot of terrain, but I wouldn't let that necessarily intimidate you. I think this is very much geared towards a D&D type player, and no reason you couldn't just take the miniatures you got there if you've got miniatures, and like I said, play on a dry erase board and just kind of set things up and draw them out. But everything is really specific. Like you can see, this is a pathways a certain width, give or take. These little flies come out of these little fly holes, which I've marked with those tokens, and stuff like that. So everything is very specific, and there's a certain setup that you're going to play through, and you're going to play through it in order. There's not like a generic scenario that you can just set up and play. Although I could see folks taking the scenarios that are in there and kind of doing riffing on them to kind of just build up some kind of like replayable scenario. But I will say, having played through a lot of scenarios now, that the game actually is very replayable, even though there's like a linear narrative. As soon as I kind of play through this, I've been playing through it solo. I definitely want to hook up with a friend or two of mine and play through it again, because the rules kind of change up and the balance and things kind of scale a little bit differently based on the player count. And there is some randomization to things that you may or may not find and so on that will make it replayable. So here you've got the book. I just want to show you a little bit about how it's organized. And it gives you basically all the stuff you're going to do to set up your warband. You're going to have one ranger. This is kind of like your avatar, so to speak. And you're going to have a varying number of companions. And this tells you how to kind of build everything up, get your party going, and how that's going to work. If you have like 2, 3, or 4 players, you'll each have a ranger with different ways to recruit companions, but it does scale, so you don't have like a flood of characters on the board. And it tells you, walks you through all the missions and stuff. And then in the back of this book, there's kind of a large multi-scenario forking, branching campaign, if you will. And of course, it tells you the rules and everything, which I'll show you. And then it's got stats for everything in the bestiary. Here's, so I maybe have a Man-at-Arms, and it shows you all the stats and everything. So let's go ahead and look at the character sheet. So here is the Ranger sheet, and there's a couple of key areas. Here's your stat line. So you got move, fight, shoot, armor, will, and health, all there. You've got abilities and spells. You've got the skills here, so a variety of skills. And then you've got your basic items. So to start off, you take some basic items that you can just take and just pick however many you can. You have a fixed number of items. And then as you kind of adventure along, you'll be swapping those in and out with hopefully more magical and better items. And then, but it's a very fixed, limited inventory there. Now what you're going to get is 10 build points that you can spend in these other areas here. So you can spend up to three of those 10 build points in the stats. So I upgraded my move and so on. You can spend a build point to get up to 5 different abilities and or spells, and then you can spend up to 5 build points into skills. And when you spend a build point in your skills, you can upgrade 8 different skills by 1. Now I've gained some other skill points here over the course of the game, but when I started off, I just picked 8 different skills and upgraded them all by 3. You can mix and match those for each build point that you spend, but that's what I decided to do, to kind of focus on some certain things. And then you also get recruitment points, which you start off with 100, but you can also spend those build points that you spend out here in recruitment and buff that up. And there's like a leadership ability that'll allow you to get more recruitment points. Now these are always used to spend on these different companions here. And so these, I actually only have 3 companions. I picked kind of the more expensive ones. Like Francesca here, she's a conjurer, and I actually spent a little bit extra so she could take 3 spells instead of just 2. And then I have a knight and a savage here. But there's cheaper ones, so maybe I would have more, but they're not as expensive per character. When you're playing with more than one player, the amount of recruitment points you come into with is actually divided. You'll have your fixed number, but let's say we're playing a 2-player game. I don't remember what the exact formula is, but let's say everybody gets half the recruitment points. So they have half. And then the actual number of models is also reduced. So in a single player game, you've got 100 recruitment points, give or take, and then you can have 7 total companion models. But in a 2, 3, and 4 player game, the number of models you can bring is also capped in addition to the recruitment points. So it keeps the balance so you don't have a ton of figures on the board. And then these folks here will actually also level up. You've noticed, of course, here, we have level 2 with 44 experience. And so as you get up, you can get more points to spend on stats and skills and all that kind of stuff and abilities. And then here you get progression points. So when you get experience in the game, you're just going to generate like a pool of experience, and every single ranger is going to get that number of experience in the game. And so there's no fighting over what to kill or anything like that, which is really cool. And it's a little bit more granular. You get experience for killing different types of monsters or completing different objectives and things. Here, if a companion makes it through the quest without getting knocked out, or getting through the scenario, I should say, without getting knocked down to 0 hit points, they just get a progression point. And so you can see only Billy here he's got his 5th progression point. I don't remember what I buffed him up on. I think I gave him another health or something, yeah. And so every 5 progression points you can, the book tells you what you can buff up. And so like the Savage here, he was Frankie, now he's Frankie Stein, because I just brought him back, but he lost all his progression and cool items that he had. He just starts again with his basic equipment. So these do level up, but just a little bit simpler way than the Rangers do themselves. And then you'll want to write down here, I use just a blank sheet of paper here, and also this stuff here, because the stat lines for all the monsters and things fit in this anyway, so you can print this out. And there's a bunch of good files on Board Game Geek and on the Facebook group, which I should mention is a great Facebook group for just building your guys quicker. I actually used, a friend of mine made a Google Doc. I built it in there, and then I just wrote everything down because it's easier to keep track of in the game with a pencil. But you can write down all the creatures that you're going to be facing and any of the special abilities and stuff. And certain weapons will do extra damage and all that kind of fun stuff. And this, a little play right here, it's a 2-pager, is great. This is going to get you most of the way there. And I found that I just lived in this mostly, and once or twice, a few times as I learned the game, I got to go refer to the book for something specific or something unclear. But this is great. This is very similar to the Frostgrave turn order sequence. So let's just take a look. So every turn is the Ranger phase, and then the Ranger with the highest will goes first, and then they can activate themselves and then up to 2 companions within 3 inches. And then the creature phase goes. After all the rangers go, the creatures go, and then any other companions that weren't within range there go. And then you have an event phase where you either draw an event card or do something outlined in the scenario, which I'll show you in a second. And so when a ranger goes, they get 2 actions. If they do 2 actions, one of them has to be moved, and then one of them could be these other things. If they move again, it's half their movement. So if you remember, my ranger was a 7-inch. So if they move twice, it'd be 7 plus 3.5. So they'd move 10.5 inches if they kind of like ran. Then you can fight, shoot, cast spells, interact with something on the scenario as well. And then this is an interesting note here. If group activation, all figures in a group must move as their first action. So if you do group activate, they'll have to move, which makes it gets interesting with the combat and stuff. And then it's basic movement stuff, different terrain and things. Now the creature activation is very simple. As the creature's in combat, it's going to fight. They're always going to do 2 actions, so they could fight twice here. If they're line of sight of the hero, they're going to shoot at it if they got a shooting weapon, or they're going to move close to it. And then now maybe they're in combat, so they'll fight it. And then you just kind of use this thing. So if they're in combat fight, if they can see it, they move towards it or shoot it. And if the scenario includes a target point, remember I mentioned that earlier, sometimes it'll say they'll always move towards this like objective marker or something, or do a certain thing. So if it has a target point, they'll do that. Otherwise, they're going to move randomly, and that's done by rolling the d20 here, and then just pointing in that direction, and then up to the creature's movement. So let's just do a quick kind of sample turn here. And so the first thing is we're going to go. And so everybody's within 3 inches of my ranger here in the middle. And so you can activate up to 2 others. And so maybe she moves again, and then these guys run up here. And then it's creature activation turn. And so sometimes it doesn't matter. So you just activate the creatures in whichever order you want. But sometimes I've found that it's opportune it'd be better or more beneficial or worse for you, whatever, to have them activate in certain orders, especially when there's like a range combat. So you can just kind of roll and activate randomly. Most of the time it doesn't super matter. So these guys would mostly move up, and these guys can fly and stuff. So let's say they get into combat here with that one, and this one, move up there, and maybe he gets up close, but not quite into combat yet. And so when you fight, you take an action to a fight, or the creatures take an action to fight. Then you're going to roll 2 d20s, one for you, one for the creature. And then that was terrible for the creature. They rolled a 1, and then we rolled a 14. And you're going to add your fight stat, which if you look here, so I got +3, maybe the creature has a +1. So I got 17 to 2. Obviously that's not a lot. So then we're going to select the winner. Obviously it's me in this case. They had a 17. They're then going to look at the creature's armor stat and subtract that from the total. So it'd be 17 minus 11, which would be 6. And then we're going to subtract 6 hit points from that creature, which I think these are 4, so that would kill it. And then he would go away. And it's the same idea, back and forth if they had 1. So it's a little swingy, right? Because it's d20, and you can see they rolled a 1 and they just crushed them. But that can work back against you the other way as well. Shooting is the same. You want line of sight, the certain range based on what kind of bow you've got. Some of the crossbows require you to take an action to actually, your move action, if you will, to actually reload a crossbow, but they do a little bit better damage and so on. Now let's say we fought him and it wasn't enough to kill him. We could, if we won, then back up an inch or push this an inch. Now the creatures will never do that. They're always try to stay locked into combat with you. But that's good because that could kind of clear space from you to maybe run away if you wanted or something like that. Because once you're in combat, the only action you can take is actually to fight. You can't cast spells or shoot or anything either. And then anything, like when something moves, if it gets within an inch, it'll sort of snap to that character either way. The creature will always force you, so you can't just like scoot around the creature. It sort of like will block a passage or something. You'll have to fight it. Now, if there are other friends assisting you like this, let's say it was like that, these two are both in combat with this. So let's say our savage who was trying to attack, they're going to get +2 on their attack when they're fighting because they've got a friend assisting. And if they had a third here, they would get another +2. However, let's say it was like this here. Let's kind of arrange that a little bit. Can we see that? Yeah. So let's say this guy's fighting him. Well, this one she could assist him, but she's also in combat herself with somebody else over here. So that's going to kind of like negate that. So there's a couple of diagrams in the rule book. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't usually get too complicated, but you can kind of add +2, +4. Sometimes they cancel each other out to your actual roll there and add your fight stat to that. But combat is super quick. I mean, it's simply like roll 2d20s, add up the appropriate modifiers, and then away you go. And then as you go along, you get some magic items and things that will sort of add little nooks and crannies to it, and the characters and the creatures you fight will get more powerful and stuff and do different things. Now, of course, after the creatures have gone, now we got a chance to activate the rest of our companions, and they will activate in the same way as well. And again, you can take a free action to do one of your heroic abilities once per game, but you can actually do that like not on your turn. So if you have a heroic ability that gives you plus to fight, like my ranger does, she could activate that on a creature activation, but only once per activation can she do a heroic ability. But once she uses that anyway, it's done for the turn. If you have spells, which this conjurer has, you can only do those on your turn, and those actually do cost an actual action to cast a spell. Now, after the ranger phase, the creature phase, and then the rest of the companions go, you're going to have an event phase. And sometimes there will be very specific events in the narrative of the scenario, but a lot of times you'll have an event deck, and you just need a deck of 52 cards, and it'll tell you to put in certain numbers and certain colors. Like this particular scenario is just a bunch of red cards, doesn't matter hearts or spades. And then sometimes this will actually act as a counter for the number of turns. Sometimes you might need a dice or something to keep track of the turns. But I know I won't get to these last two in this particular case. And so when you flip it up, then you're going to then read in the book and see what you get. So if you pull a red ace, we're going to place a giant fly in each of the 3 fly holes. There's 3 kind of spawn points that the scenario told us to mark out. If we pulled up the red 9, place 2 giant flies on the fly hole 3. So as you go through, you're going to start to see that, oh, well, we already drew this one, it won't happen again. But usually there's always a little bit more events than there are turns, which is why I have those cards turned sideways. So you're never quite sure. You can't really 100% count on an event. So these will happen, but like I said, sometimes the scenario will have a specific thing. They also will have a little section of special rules. Maybe you'll make a test here. So climb rolls, acrobatics rolls, over here navigation rolls. Again, these are the skills that you have on your ranger sheet, as well as sometimes the companions will have skills as well. Sometimes you want them to do a skill. So again, you just roll a d20, add the modifier, then you're looking for a target number. So at the end of this scenario, one of the objectives is to map out this sort of stair, this climb, and you want to do a navigation roll. So you add your navigation score wherever you have it, and then you roll a d20 and you hopefully get it. And then it'll tell you what the experience you get is. And you can see you get experience for like sealing the fly holes, killing the flies. There's a love letter you can actually recover here. And sometimes there's certain things that you just won't be able to do because you do something else in a scenario. So like I said, you won't necessarily have the same exact playthrough. And of course, you might have a different set of events. There was one scenario where I played where you actually you set up 3 kind of empty rooms, and then you drew these cards here, and there was 4 cards, but only 3 rooms. So I played through it and I didn't find the lab. I just found the other 3 rooms. So if I played through it again, maybe this time I find the lab. The lab's the first one I find, and the armory's the last one we find. So it is going to vary up, but these are all sort of tightly, knit to the narrative of the scenario. And like I said, there's definitely a more complex and epic sort of campaign here in the back. There's even some kind of like Tales of the Arabian Nights little like story passages to read and stuff that go with that. So that's pretty cool. So there's a lot that he can do, and others can do. There's been a bunch of scenarios put out online on Facebook and Board Game Geek to kind of play with this event phase to change up the scenarios and stuff. So that's basically all the game rules. You can see there's like all the modifiers for terrain and cover and heavy cover. All that's pretty clear. At the end of the scenario, you'll get your experience points. You'll get your progression points for the companions. Anybody that drops out is knocked out, and you'll roll on this sort of recovery chart here, and they can die. Your ranger will actually add +1 to their roll, so they'll only die on a 1, whereas your companions could die on a 1 or a 2. And then you get permanent injury, which will make you roll on another table and so on. And then you can roll for how they're injured and stuff like that. And then you get a chance to spend your experience points if you leveled up and all that kind of fun stuff. But that's all pretty simple and straightforward. It's really about this kind of narrative that you're telling. Okay, so that is Rangers of Shadowdeep. Well, let's do my 3 kind of pillars of reviews. And the first one would be like player time and player count would be the other one. Well, I've only played this solo, although I would 100%, like I mentioned in the walkthrough, play this with probably 2 players or 3 players. 4 is a hunch that it might be like a little too many. It's kind of like too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing. But 100% I'd play with 2 or 3 players even. Because like I said, it scales the model count and kind of the strength of each individual party based on the number of players. That kind of dovetails into player time, and the scenario is really going to kind of dictate the length of the game. I played a scenario that was about 30 minutes, and I think my first scenario was a little over an hour, but again, it's kind of like learning the game and stuff. And then other scenarios have been give or take probably 45 minutes, maybe up to an hour and stuff. But like I said, I'm soloing them. I'm kind of playing it a little casually, where I'll take a little bit of extra time and really think through something, because I'm not really under any pressure to get it done. I would say ballpark. That's, it's kind of going to depend on your group and stuff in terms of how much you get into, kind of BSing back and forth at the table and that kind of stuff. So I'd say ballpark 30 minutes to probably 90, because I've looked at some of the later ones, and even like the one where I had to like set up the rooms and things as you went along. So I set up all the terrain, and then I was like, okay, if I draw the armory, I'll use these pieces and make it really dense and lots of line of sight blocking. If I do the other room, it'll be these pieces, not so much line of sight blocking and stuff. And so there's a little bit of time there in terms of setup and like preparing and stuff like that. But like I said, you could use a dry erase map or whatever, like you use for Dungeons and Dragons, and play it, and I think it'd be fine. Like I would play it that way. I like playing it with, all the bling and the decoration and stuff. But I totally would play it if somebody was like, let's just whip out the map and draw it up and play. I would totally do that. So some of the other scenarios and stuff, though, apart from setup, is they're going to take a little bit longer, I think up to 90 minutes, because there's some really involved stuff as you move along. So that's kind of the gist. And, well, I don't really want to sell short the setup time, because, if we're talking about playtime, there's going to be some setup in creating your character and stuff. That took a couple of hours to kind of digest the rules and figure out what kind of party I wanted to put together and all that stuff. And then, think about because the scenarios are broken into missions. So there's like one mission with 2 scenarios, and then there's 2 more missions in the main book with 3 scenarios. And then there's like a 8 scenario giant thing at the end. So there's a little bit of time and prep and thinking about, okay, what terrain do I have? How do I want to set this up? This one called for like a river, that I don't have any river pieces. I don't have any water in my terrain. So I set up kind of a funky mountain pass with like only one way through, and then like a bridge through the mountain because there was a bridge on the river. So a little bit of thinking and stuff in terms of like, well, how am I going to do this so that, physically it's not what the designer intended, but I think mechanically and stuff and sort of the balance of it, I wanted to get as close as I could to that. Some of these like there was like an elaborate tower thing where you had the concentric things. Well, I mean, I got it pretty close. You can look at the Instagram stuff. So my point is that there's a little bit of time there involved with preparation. So I don't want to over or understate that. And then the last pillar is kind of like, what is this game like? Well, it's a lot like Frostgrave, frankly, where you're playing just kind of against the random monsters, even though they're not random in this case, and not so much, against other players. Now, where it departs from Frostgrave is you don't have like a boatload of spells flying all over the table. Because if you're just playing like a 2-player game of Frostgrave, you've got 16 potentially completely different spells in play, and lots of stuff that will change up the terrain and all that kind of stuff, and it's very competitive and head-to-head, and then, lo and behold, you have a demon or a zombie wander in and then start wrecking havoc with one or both of you. But the combat is super simple, just like Frostgrave. The rules are real straightforward in terms of how you do the activations and stuff. And then it has that kind of similar vibe to playing like cooperative Walking Dead, or I haven't played actually the new Fallout cooperative, but so it will fit into that ballpark. It kind of feels like you're playing like Descent or something, but for the tabletop and not really a board game. Or, Descent's not cooperative, but like Warhammer Quest or something, you're playing that cooperatively. So it has that feel to it where you're trying to move around and fight stuff and then get to these objective points, or go over here and do a skill check or something like that. And in that way, because of the skills really, and because of kind of the limited amount of hero abilities, which really remind me of feats. I don't remember if they have feats still in Dungeons & Dragons. I played 5th edition like a year or 2 years ago now. But it was like half-baked campaign that really didn't get off the ground. I played a lot of three and a half or whatever back in college, and I remember there being feats. So the heroic abilities kind of feel like feats, and then you have like your normal skills that you apply to skill check. So it does feel like a lot like a kind of a cooperative light D&D, where you've got you and your companions, and maybe you and a friend with their companions, and then you're using the skill checks that's got real funky swingy combat, which is what I really like about this system. And you're going through a narrative kind of designed not by the game master but by the designer, with really, dead simple kind of event system. The event system is like really what seals the deal for me, because that's what makes it replayable. Whereas there are some scenarios where it's like a specific thing will happen on turn 2, and then this thing will happen on turn 4, and this thing on turn 5. Most of the scenarios don't actually do that. They use the events, so you never know what order they're going to come out. You might get some events that are like changing the environment, and maybe it starts raining or something, which reduces line of sight. Maybe more monsters will spawn up, different things like that. There'll always be these little wrinkles and special rules in this scenario where you have to do like a skill check. There was one where we were kind of like stealthing around, and we could kind of like auto distract certain of the monsters if we passed the stealth check. And then so that particular scenario I was actually doing really well at the beginning, so which got us a good leg up, but then we failed it and so on. So maybe you fail that right out the gate, and then you can't do that anymore or something. So even within sort of a system, the system itself is still going to sort of adapt to the player behavior and stuff, or just throw stuff sort of randomly a little bit at the player. So it's not going to be a stagnant thing. And I mentioned it in the walkthrough that I've got, let's see here, this and one other scenario, or no, 2 more scenarios after this one. And then I'll play through like the main basic sort of campaign, which should get me hopefully to about level 5. And then the big scenario at the end gets you to level 5. But I would definitely make a new party, and then play this through with somebody else as well. Like, even though I've already played through it, it's not like there's not like a lot that is hidden that there would be a reveal. Now in the big campaign in the back of the book, there's those narrative little entries that I haven't played through it, so maybe that would be one that I wouldn't want to necessarily play through again. But certainly this main basic scenario, this would be a great one to introduce and just play through with a friend or two, and I would do that a couple of times. Because the thing is that you can take and twist it a little bit. So like I said, I set up that scenario before that had a river, and I did a little mountain pass. Well, next time I play it, maybe I go and get some river stuff or build a little river, and I actually play it with that. And then maybe like the first scenario has a bunch of buildings in the village. Well, if I arrange them in a different way, then you're going to play it a different way. So just by arranging the terrain and the landscape, that is going to change it up. The events are going to change it up. The skill checks, passing or failing, are going to change it up. The party you bring to it is going to change it up. Like this time I have a conjurer. Maybe I don't bring a magic user next time. Maybe I bring a rogue or something. So there is replayability here, and I think it's a great system because I've already seen like maybe half a dozen campaigns or little quests and missions from players posted onto the Facebook group and onto BGG, and I could see as this possibly being used as a tool to create your own campaigns and missions and scenarios for players, as a system. I think the selling point of this, though, of course, is the co-op and the solo part, because there's it doesn't exist. This is another really interesting thing about this. I don't know every miniature game ever made, but the 2 that I talked about are just sort of modes in another game that's competitive. This is, I guess there's a couple of cooperative, well, not cooperative, sidetracking there, but in Necromunda, you can have the Arbiter, and they act as kind of the DM, and the players can play that. So they are kind of playing cooperative sometimes, depending on how the Arbiter wants to do it. You could do something like that with this, where going through these scenarios, I can already kind of think of certain things. I can see how he balanced certain things, and I can take a shot at it. But you can kind of dig in and learn this, and read some of the other supplements, and then present this as a couple of scenarios for your game group, and maybe rip the event deck out of it, and have a hand of cards or something where you're like, well, I'm going to play this one now because this would be really good. And so you could take that event deck, make it a little bit smarter because a player would drive it and they would maybe do some other decisions with the monsters and stuff like that. Anyway, it'd be a fun tool to use for a real light, kind of quick, D&D light kind of thing. Anyway, so I definitely highly recommend this game. I got a few questions about, do I like this more than Frostgrave? I don't really know. They're kind of different. Because I've been having a blast playing through this for about the past week, off and on, and a lot the past weekend. I played it a whole bunch. And I'm really liking, I wouldn't say like the actual narrative of the story is, there's not like a lot of lore or anything, but it's cool. Like, it's just, there's enough there that I feel like I'm on this adventure. And I feel like I'm playing a choose your own adventure, but on a miniature tabletop level. And that's awesome, because that's just not an experience that I've really had, where you're playing through a story and a choose your own adventure thing. And it has a lot of those feels from that, I guess from like my childhood a little bit, where, I would get a choose your own adventure book, or like a Lone Wolf, not Lone Wolf and Cub, a Lone Wolf book, or a Steve Jackson sorcery book or something. But it's all come alive and everything. So this is a very, very unique and different experience. So I really love it for that. Now, the thing that Frostgrave has that this doesn't have is sort of obvious when I say it out loud, is like, well, it's got the head-to-head. It's got the spells. It's got all the crazy configurations and all that stuff. You still have kind of the monsters and stuff, which is what I really love about Frostgrave, actually, is the monsters just kind of coming in and wreaking havoc. So both the games are very vivid, which is what I really enjoy about both of them. They both elicit like a vivid setting and a place, and there's a lot of narrative and story that sort of emerges right out of the game. But man, I highly recommend this game for folks. If you've got like especially if like you're a war gamer or whatever, you got a bunch of terrain laying around from Warhammer or for your Frostgrave games or whatever, a bunch of models, then just substitute whatever. Like, these are supposed to be giant flies that I showed you, but whatever, man. Those are giant fly people. I'll just give them the same stats as the fly. It's good. And so, like, the whole creation part of that is part of the fun. But like I said, if you've got like a copy of Descent and maybe a couple expansions or something, you've got Claustrophobia and Descent, and you can, mix and match those miniatures and get a little dry erase map or whatever, then you can just go for it. And it's really, really a lot of fun. So anyways, this is like a high recommendation for me. This is like in my, I know it's, was it February? This is in my running for like game of the year. I know I said New Frontiers, which you can't see over here. It was a completely different kind of game, but this, I'm like, wow, this is great. Anybody that feels like they can do this, that either wants to have the terrain or prepare the terrain, is okay with playing on the map, has some miniatures laying around, you got to get this. It's a no-brainer. You get the book, it's a few bucks, and then you can sit down and play through it, and it's just great. It's just very imaginative, and it really triggers the imagination. So I'm done babbling, because I love this freaking game. So there you go. Thanks.